Friday of the 15th week in Ordinary Time.
A reading from the book of Exodus. Although Moses and Aaron performed various wonders in Pharaoh's presence, the Lord made Pharaoh obstinate, and he would not let the children of Israel leave his land. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall stand at the head of your calendar. You shall reckon it the first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel, on the 10th of this month, every one of your families must procure for itself a lamb, one apiece for each household. If a family is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join the nearest household in procuring one, and shall share in the lamb, in proportion to the number of persons who partake it. The lamb must be a year old, male and without blemish. You may take it from either the sheep or the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, and then, with the whole assembly of Israel present, it shall be slaughtered during the evening twilight. They shall take some of its blood and apply it to the 2 doorposts and the lintel of every house in which they partake of the lamb. That same night they shall eat its roasted flesh, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. It shall not be eaten raw or boiled, but roasted whole, with its head and shanks and inner organs. None of it must be kept beyond the next morning. Whatever is left over in the morning shall be burned up. This is how you are to eat it: with your loins girt, sandals on your feet, and your staff in hand. You shall eat like those who are in flight. It is the Passover of the Lord. For on this same night I will go through Egypt, striking down every firstborn of the land, both man and beast, and executing judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I, the Lord. But the blood will mark the houses where you are. Seeing the blood, I will pass over you. Thus, when I strike the land of Egypt, no destructive blow will come upon you. This day shall be a memorial feast for you, which all your generations shall celebrate, with pilgrimage to the Lord as a perpetual institution." The word of the Lord.
The responsorial psalm. The response is, "I will take the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. How shall I make a return to the Lord for all the good he has done for me? The cup of salvation I will take up, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. I will take the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. Precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones. I am your servant, the son of your handmaid. You have loosed my bonds. I will take the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. To you will I offer sacrifice of thanksgiving, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people. I will take the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord."
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus was going through a field of grain on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick the heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "See, your disciples are doing what is unlawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? How he went into the house of God and ate the bread of offering, which neither he nor his companions, but only the priests could lawfully eat? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests serving in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent? I say to you, something greater than the temple is here. If you knew what this meant, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned these innocent men. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." The Gospel of the Lord.
Friday of the 15th week in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from Exodus 11:10 to 12:14. This passage speaks about the first Passover. Now, Passover probably was originally an agricultural feast, a feast to celebrate the birthing of the new crop of lambs. And that's why the sacrifice offered on Passover was a 1-year-old lamb from those that were born a year ago, to celebrate the fact that a new crop of lambs is being born at that time. But this passage shows how the agricultural feast is historified. It's made into a commemoration of the passing over of the Israelites, passing over the sea, the passing over of the angel of death, which protects the Israelite children but destroys the firstborn of all the Egyptians. A lamb is killed and its blood is put on the lintel of the house, a sign to protect them against this angel of death. And the lamb is to be eaten that day, that whatever is left beyond the morning should be burnt up. Because this is a special celebration. It's to be commemorated in a special way. They're to eat this meal with their loins girt and sandals on their feet, ready to travel. And in fact, even after this date, whenever they annually celebrated the Passover, they would dress up as if they were ready to leave on a journey. Because when Jewish people celebrate the Passover, they believe they're actually participating in the Passover. They're passing beyond time and space to be one with what happened so long ago in Egypt. We have that same idea when we celebrate the Eucharist. We're not in Buffalo, we're not in Baltimore, we're not in Dallas. We're at the Last Supper, we're at the cross, we're at the resurrection. And this is to be a celebration commemorated annually. It's interesting that as we read the history of Israel, there were periods of time where it doesn't seem as Passover was celebrated, and they needed kings who would reform the religion of Israel and bring back that celebration. Now, when was it to be celebrated? At the beginning of the passage it says, at the beginning of the year. That doesn't quite fit the Jewish calendar today, because for them, Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of New Year, occurs in September. It seems as if in the early days of Israel, their calendar began in April, around time of Passover, and it was only later, possibly when they were exiled in Babylon, that they adopted the Babylonian calendar, which had the new year begin in September, which agriculturally actually makes more sense because September is the time of the first rains, the beginning of the planting season. So it's a good time to mark the beginning of the year. So just by this little detail, the changing of the calendar from one that began in the spring to one that begins in the fall, it shows us that ideas, concepts did change in Old Testament times. And we have to be careful when we say, what does the Old Testament say about it? Because very often the Old Testament says this, and then later on the Old Testament says that. The Gospel is from Matthew 12, 1 to 8. Jesus is walking through a field of grain on the Sabbath, and some of his disciples pick a few of the heads of grain and eat it. Now, technically that was allowed on the Sabbath, but remember, the Pharisees who are complaining about what the disciples did, they built a fence around the law. They interpreted the law to its widest possible interpretation to make sure they never broke the smallest part of the law. So they say that it wasn't allowed. Actually, it was. What is Jesus' response? Don't you remember what David did when he entered the shrine of the Lord? He ate the bread of offering. Now, the bread of offering was only to be eaten by someone who was consecrated, one of the priests. But they broke the rules because this was a question of emergency, a question of saving somebody's life. And the Jewish law is very clear that whenever an emergency occurs, you can break the law. What does Jesus say at the end? I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He tells the Pharisees that they become legalistic. They're serving the law. Jesus intends on serving people because that's the fulfillment of the law. He also says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Now, who is the Lord of the Sabbath? God alone. So when he says the Son of Man, and that's the title he uses for himself, when he says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, he's implying that he has the right to change the regulations concerning the Sabbath. And that will infuriate the Pharisees because he's attributing to himself a divine prerogative. Even though he doesn't say the words, he's effectively saying, I have the very authority of God. And may God bless us.